I never woke up one morning and decided I would be on my own. There was no dramatic promise or moment of clarity. Independence crept in quietly, like doors closing one after another until turning back no longer felt possible. When I was 15, I took my first part-time job because I wanted the freedom of my own paycheck. At 16, I picked up a second one because I didn't want to ask my parents for extra money. By the time I was wrapping up high school, working wasn't something I questioned anymore. It felt normal, necessary, safer than waiting on someone else to come through for me. My parents praised it as responsibility. They called it maturity. Meanwhile, my younger sister's open schedule was described very differently. She was exploring, finding herself, figuring things out. I never blamed her for that. We weren't competing, we were just built differently. I learned early on that if I wanted anything, tuition, textbooks, reliable transportation that wouldn't leave me stranded on an interstate outside Columbus, I had to figure it out on my own. She learned that time could stretch and that opportunities would eventually show up. College was 4 long years stitched together by exhaustion and stubborn determination. Some semesters, I worked 3 jobs at once. I skipped weekend trips. I skipped spring breaks. I skipped the carefree parts of youth people later talk about with nostalgia. When I graduated with student loans still hanging over me, my parents hugged me, told me how proud they were, and then life moved forward like it always does. At 25, I bought a condo. It wasn't impressive, just a modest 1-bedroom outside of Raleigh with thin walls and a mortgage that kept me awake during quiet nights. I didn't celebrate. I didn't announce it online. I barely told anyone at all. It felt fragile, like something that might vanish if I drew too much attention to it. My parents learned about it through my sister. At first, the change in them was subtle. Their voices were cooler when they asked about work. Compliments were replaced with jokes that didn't quite land. "Must be nice," they'd say, smiling just enough to keep things polite. I convinced myself I was reading too much into it. Then one afternoon, my mom called and said, "You need to be careful. Your sister's really struggling." I paused, waiting for her to explain. "She feels like you're setting an impossible example," my mother said. I didn't understand what that meant. I still don't, not fully. I had never compared us. I'd never offered advice or commented on her choices. I had simply continued down the path I'd been pushing myself along for years. "She thinks you're making her look like a failure," my mom added. The words hung between us, heavy and misplaced. Instinct kicked in, the familiar urge to smooth things over, to apologize even when I wasn't sure why. But something stopped me. "I didn't do anything to her," I said quietly. After that, my dad took over the conversations. He spoke in his usual calm, managerial tone, the one he used whenever emotions needed to be reframed as logistics. He suggested I be more mindful, that I minimize my accomplishments, that I consider how my progress affected the family balance. When he said the word success, it sounded less like praise and more like an accusation. I tried. I really did. I stopped sharing updates. I dodged questions. I shrank myself in conversations where I used to speak freely. But instead of easing, the tension solidified. It hardened into something sharp and immovable. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. It wasn't dramatic, just formal language printed on legal paper. It stated that my parents were pursuing legal action related to financial imbalance tied to family contributions during my upbringing. I read it 3 times before it fully registered. They were arguing that because they had emotionally supported me while I worked through school, I owed them compensation. That my independence had unfairly benefited from a household environment that, in their words, favored my advancement over my sisters. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after that. I didn't cry. I wasn't angry. I was stunned by how quietly something fundamental could fracture. The court date came sooner than I expected. Sitting in that room in downtown Durham, I felt smaller than I ever had while juggling 3 jobs or studying at 4 in the morning. My life had been reduced to claims and counterclaims, stripped of tone, stripped of intent. My parents spoke about fairness, about family unity, about how outcomes mattered more than effort. When it was my turn, I didn't perform. I didn't defend my worth. I answered questions. I submitted pay stubs, tuition bills, lease agreements, years of evidence showing that my independence wasn't symbolic. It was documented. The judge listened carefully, asked a few clarifying questions, and then explained, calmly but firmly, that emotional discomfort did not create legal obligation. That personal achievement did not constitute liability. That the court could not redistribute outcomes simply to equalize feelings. It was over in less than an hour. Outside the courthouse, my parents avoided my eyes. My sister cried. I wanted to reach for her. I didn't. We didn't speak for months after that. When we finally did, the conversations were cautious and thin, like testing ice with the tip of your shoe. Something had changed permanently. Not just trust, but the shape of the relationship itself. I still live in the condo. I still work hard. I still feel flashes of guilt sometimes, like an old reflex that hasn't yet learned the danger has passed. There was no victory. No apology big enough to repair what broke. Just a quiet realization that effort doesn't guarantee closeness, and fairness doesn't always feel gentle. That day taught me something no one warns you about. Independence doesn't just cost energy or time, it can cost relationships. It's the moment when your success becomes evidence against you. I didn't change who I was after court. I just stopped making myself smaller so others could feel bigger. And that decision, more than anything I ever earned or bought, is the one that finally stayed.